Welcome to the eShopperReviews podcast, episode 23. This is the podcast for February 2023, and I'm Jenn Ip.
And I'm Jake McNeil.
For those new to this podcast, eShopperReviews is a subreddit on reddit.com where Jake reviews games on the Nintendo Switch platform, and you can find this subreddit at the URL reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. We currently have over 2,100 reviews and counting, and we are supported by your donations on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. This month's sponsors are Ben, Andy Miller, Xleen, Homer Simpin, Johannes, Talisa, Eli Goodman, Gabriel Coronado Medina, Ilya Zervev, Christopher Wolf, and Seth Christianfeld. Thank you all for helping to keep the reviews coming. Now on to the Patreon voted game, which includes the standard vote and the all-patron budget vote. And the all-patron budget vote is Discmaster.
This one actually got multiple votes. They were all unanimous, actually, which is a bit new for the budget vote. So I guess people are really curious about this one. As with pretty much all of these all-patron budget votes, I know nothing about this game. So I guess I will find out when I play it and review it, and we'll see how good it is.
All right, and then the standard vote was Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe.
My patrons constantly surprise me with these votes. This was a game that I included in the vote, largely because I know it is a major release within the months of January and February, and I wanted to list, 6 of the biggest releases in those months. But at the same time, this is a remake of a game that's originally released on Wii. And in fact, I've kind of already reviewed that game when I reviewed the Virtual Console version of the Wii version on the Wii U. So it'll be interesting to see how it has changed transitioning to the Nintendo Switch. But given that I think that there were some other more major releases in the first couple of months of the year, I'm kind of surprised that this is the direction that the patrons went, but I'm happy to honor their wishes, and I guess we'll find out how this one is.
All right, next month's vote, which are 2022 games that weren't in any prior patron votes,
Yes,
include Chained Echoes, Easy Come, Easy Golf, Eschatos?
I think that's the correct pronunciation. I'm
Okay.
going to guess.
One Shot World Machine Edition, Signalis, and Steve Jackson's Sorcery.
When I do the patron votes, I try to cover a lot of the biggest games of the year by the end of the year. And in fact, toward the end of 2022, I had a major vote where I listed a lot of the highest rated games of that year. But looking over review scores for 2022, I realized that there were a lot of these games that I still had not had in a patron vote yet. And in some cases, this is because they came out very late in the year and just by that point it was already too late. In some cases, it was because they were ports of older games, and to be honest, I knew it was less likely that they would make their way into the eShopperReviews Game Award thing because they would be disqualified due to their age. And I was just like, well, it's less urgent that I review these than other games. But it's also not entirely fair to them because these are, at least according to reviews I've seen, all supposed to be very good. In fact, Chained Echoes in particular, I had some people questioning why this wasn't in my Game Awards, and I had to answer, I just haven't played it.
Interesting.
And I've heard really good things. It is one of the highest rated games on Nintendo Switch in 2022 that I have yet to play. So this is a chance for you to pick any of these games for you to hear more about in terms of what I think about it.
And the all patron budget games vote include games that have never been in a budget vote before, and they are Bow to Blood, Last Captain Standing, Sky Piece, Snowboarding, The Next Phase, Spartan, the original mobile games, Zotrix Solar Division.
It was either last month or the month before. I wanted to go through all of the $1 and $2 games that had been released on Nintendo Switch prior to this and see which ones that had been skipped over in the previous budget votes. And these are all games that came up, and I've not yet put them to the vote yet. So now's your opportunity to give them a vote and see what I have to say about one of them. As per usual with the budget vote, I know nothing about any of these games. I'm sure that snowboarding is a snowboarding game, but beyond that, I couldn't tell you much about any of these. So if you're curious about one of these and you are a Patreon patron who has donated $1 or more, please pick one of these budget games to vote on so that you can hear this game talked about. And if you donate $5 or more, you can vote in both of these votes. So please make your voice heard.
Now to talk about some of the highlights for the games eShopperReviews covered in the month of January 2023. Just a note here, these are not necessarily games released in the last month, but games reviewed that month. And we'll start by talking about the worst games.
Oh, starting with the worst games.
I am so disappointed about one of these games that's on here.
I figured you would be.
So, one of the games that's on here for worst games is Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX.
So this is the standard patron voted game for
I'm
the
so
previous
disappointed.
month. I'd never played a Monster Rancher game prior to this, and I was trying to keep an open mind. And one of the things that I'd always heard was, this is not a game like Pokemon. Don't think of it like a Pokemon game, like you might be tempted to, because there are a lot of monster collecting RPGs that came out around the time Pokemon did. And Monster Rancher is often lumped in with those, but it's not like Pokemon. And to the credit of people who say that, it isn't like Pokemon. It does play very differently. For example, you only ever get one monster. You are focusing all of your efforts on your one monster. Well, since this is a 2-pack of games, one monster in each of the games.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, these are Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX. I think it would be generous to call them remakes. Really, they're just ports of 2 games that were originally released on the original PlayStation. At the time of their release, the big gimmick with these games was that you would take a music CD, pop it into your PlayStation, and based on the data on that music CD, the metadata or whatever, it would generate a monster for you. So one of the cool things about the original game was, hey, I wonder if my favorite music CD could beat your music CD. That kind of thing. It's a really cool concept. Problem number 1 with the Nintendo Switch version of this game, the Nintendo Switch does not have a CD drive, not any kind of disc drive at all. So out of necessity, they had to kind of figure out something else that they could do with it. And I don't entirely blame them for what they ended up doing, because they were limited in their options due to the format. What they ended up deciding to do was they have a list of a bunch of music CDs, and you can search for your music CD in that list, and it would just have it memorized what it would come up with. Not a perfect workaround, but acceptable. So, with Monster Rancher 1, I'm like, okay, let's go for the Thriller album. This is like one of the most popular albums of all time, Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Oh, okay.
And it generated a weird coin-shaped monster with a soccer ball on one side and a snake on the other. It was very bizarre. But, okay, that's fine. It generated a monster based on my selection. That's okay. In Monster Rancher 2, I tried this again. And I, again, tried the Thriller album to see if it would spit out the same monster, or maybe it would do something different. It would not accept the Thriller album. I was not allowed to use it, and then it booted me out to the main menu. And I went back in, and I tried out multiple other extremely popular albums to see what it would give me. And time and again, either it wasn't listed in their list, or it said that it wouldn't accept it. I wasn't allowed to use it for some reason, and it booted me back out to the prior menu, and I had to go back in again. It was really annoying. I tried the Thriller album, the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, A Kind of Magic by Queen, Yanni's Live at the Acropolis album, don't judge me. I think I tried a few others, and time and again, it failed to do anything, or it just told me I wasn't allowed for some reason. Finally, I ended up using Black Sabbath's Paranoid album, which gave me a weird little water monster with buff manly arms.
Okay.
So right off the bat, the key thing, the main gimmick that these games are known for, it's already failing that miserably.
Yikes.
Then go into the gameplay, and like I said, these games do not play like Pokemon. What you're doing in these games is you're basically organizing a schedule for your monster. When is this monster going to be training? When is it going to be working? When is it going to be resting? And ideally, you're going to be trying to manage your finances, manage the monster's health, but also make sure that your monster has a training regimen that prepares it for tournaments, which are a good way to make income.
Mm-hmm.
And also boost your rank and all of that stuff. The problem is, every single thing that you do in this game, whether or not it actually succeeds in what you're attempting to do, is down to a very stingy random number generator.
Oh.
So half the time, you send your monster out to work and it comes back, oh, sorry, boss, I failed at my job, I didn't make any money, and I got tired doing it. And that was a lot of time wasted as well. And it's like, the more this game goes on, the more I'm feeling like success or failure in this game isn't up to me. It's up to the random number generator.
I see.
And it's kind of the same in combat. When you actually go into one of the tournaments with this monster that presumably you've trained well, you have commands that you can give to your monster, but it doesn't have to follow them. It treats them more like suggestions. I tried not to judge this game in the context of, I want it to be like Pokemon, like I know a lot of people might.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not like Pokemon. But even in its own right, doing its own thing, in every area it failed miserably. And now I come back around to the whole concept of this being a remake. This game uses the same visuals as the PlayStation version, the same sound, the same mechanics. The only thing, as far as I can tell, that has really changed is because they couldn't use discs anymore. They put that incomplete list of CDs in the game. The only people that this is likely to appeal to are people who had nostalgia for the original games, and even then, they're likely to be disappointed because it completely messes up the central mechanic of reading your CD to pop out a monster.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one under the worst games category is Tracks. Build It, Race It.
With this one, technically, it does the bare minimum needed to accomplish what it's trying to do. This is a slot car racing game. And Jen, do you know what slot car racing is?
I actually don't.
Okay. Slot car racing is based on a children's toy. This was something that was popular decades ago. I'm not sure if it's still popular now.
Uh-huh.
So this might have even been before your time. But the basic idea is you would get this set of interconnected tracks that would have an electrical current running through the track.
Uh-huh.
And your vehicle would run on that electrical current, and you'd have a little controller that you could squeeze the controller to make your car go faster or slower. And you and your brother or a friend or whatever would race against each other with, each of your cars would be on the same track. But the trick to it was, if your car was going too fast when it hit a turn, it would skid off of the turn and fly off of the track.
Okay, so that's a really neat idea, and I'm kind of sad I never grew up with that concept.
Aww.
The only thing that's even remotely similar to that I remember are, racetracks that are interconnected, but it just has a little motor that constantly spins. You just tuck the car in between the motor and it zooms off, and that's it.
And one of the cool things with these slot car racetracks, some of them were made to be modular, which meant that you could take the tracks apart and you could reconstruct them any way you wanted to. You could add new sections into the track so you could make your own custom-built racetracks.
That's pretty neat.
Clubhouse Games, which has like 50 games in it, one of the games, on Nintendo Switch version at least, is a slot car racing game. And you can even have multiple Nintendo Switch systems and physically put them next to each other to use that to custom make your own track that goes across multiple. It's a really cute feature.
Yeah.
Tracks Build It, Race It is a slot car racing game that tries to do something roughly comparable, not the same, putting your switches next to each other thing, but the basic idea is it is a slot car racing game and you can build your own custom tracks in the game. Hey, that's kind of cool. A couple of problems though. Number one, it is just in one location. You get one background for all of the races. It's very monotonous and boring. No music, making it even more boring. The track builder only has a few different pieces that you can use. Very limited and boring.
Yeah.
And to top it all off, if you're actually playing the game, it doesn't give you any kind of indication if you are hitting a turn too quickly and need to slow down. You just have to hope that your speed is slow enough that you don't get flung off of the track.
Interesting.
So this makes for a game that is very monotonous and boring, and the gameplay is no fun at all.
Okay, next in the worst game category, Super Kiwi 64.
So this is a prequel of sorts to another game we'll be talking about in a little bit called MacBat 64. This game is designed to be very reminiscent of Nintendo 64 platformers, 3D platformers specifically, and more specifically, it's supposed to be reminiscent of Banjo-Kazooie.
Okay.
In some ways, it does this well. The core gameplay mechanics in this game are actually kind of fun. You have this Kiwi who obviously has a very limited ability to fly because Kiwis were notorious for that.
Oh.
But one of the cool things you can do is you can take your beak and stick it into any wall and then hop your way up the wall using your beak to climb. It's kind of fun. The problem isn't really the mechanics of the game. The problem is the levels themselves are massive, there's not much to do in them, and everything is spread thin, and they're just kind of boring as a result. It's just, I'm going around looking for collectibles. Where in this massive level have I not gone yet? There are simple enemies there, but they're enemies that are so slow and dumb, they're not any challenge at all. In fact, the game provides no challenge. It's just a matter of, where is that one collectible I haven't found yet? And granted, games like Banjo-Kazooie had a lot of collectibles in them, but there was more to them than that. And it was actually fun looking in all the nooks and crannies of the levels and finding those collectibles. Here, everything is spread so thin and the levels are so empty, it just becomes a chore. Does this game evoke Banjo-Kazooie? Sure. Does it recapture the fun that game had? Not even remote, unfortunately.
That's a shame. So, we only have one game in the Hidden Gems category.
Yes.
And that is Wreckfest.
Wreckfest, at its core, if you are just looking at the gameplay, it is just a really solid arcade-style racing game. It's very good at being an arcade-style racing game, and you even have occasional destruction derby levels where you're trying to bash out all of the other cars that are in the level. Overall, it does these things very well, and I wouldn't say that it's truly exceptional in either of these areas, but it's very, very good. If you're a racing game fan, right off the bat, this is a game that you are going to want to pay attention to because the quality of the racing in these games is excellent. But where this game goes above and beyond is in its destruction physics. Your car and the opponent's cars in this game tear themselves apart as you run into each other and into parts of the track, to the point where if you're running circles on a track or on one of the destruction derby arenas, the arena will be littered with car parts by the time that you're done. And it's actually really impressive to see all the dirt flung around, all of the car parts strewn around the place. It's fun seeing these cars tearing each other apart. And while I will say that the destruction physics are great, the way that the game looks is fantastic, this does have an effect on the frame rate. They do suffer a bit on Nintendo Switch, unfortunately.
That makes sense.
But not so much that it really kills the fun of this game or makes the gameplay suffer terribly. yes, this is a game that you would probably have a better time playing it on another platform, but the Nintendo Switch version of the game is solid, and it is such a good racing game. I definitely recommend it to fans of the genre.
So we have two noteworthy reviews. And
Yes.
the first one, I actually saw you play it, and I was fairly impressed by it.
Hmm.
The first one is Atone, Heart of the Elder Tree, and you were given a review copy that was kindly provided by Untold Tales.
That's right. Again, thank you, Untold Tales. I really appreciate it when you send games to review my way, and sometimes I like them more than others, but all the time I appreciate you giving me the chance to play them. So, Atone Heart of the Elder Tree is very heavily steeped in Norse mythology. This is a game where if you are a fan of Norse mythology, or if you're a Norse, I actually have a friend who did their senior thesis on Norse mythology, so I'm very
Oh.
curious what she will think of this game. Yeah, if that's something that interests you right off the bat, this game has something to offer you. And this game's setting takes place in a time where humanity has only just recently been more or less abandoned by the Norse gods and left to fend for themselves. And players take the role of a young girl who's kind of one of the last in a bloodline of people who have been charged with holding up the old laws for the god Odin. She is the last one of the last of her people because her village was slaughtered fairly early into the game. I could say spoilers, but this is such an early event that it's not really a major spoiler. So she flees her village and is one of the few people left to survive. And some years later, she's grown up, and her new village comes to be the victim of some sort of magical disease that causes her people to go into a berserker rage and start murdering people. And sensing that something is wrong with Yggdrasil, I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yggdrasil, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's the mother tree.
Yeah. Sensing that something is wrong with the tree, she goes on a quest to return to it to try and right whatever wrong is happening, which of course taps into her past and all the stuff that happened with her bloodline and all of that. This game, what it does really, really well is it has a wonderful, somber tone. All the people in this game are kind of surrounded by death. It is a constant in their lives. And there's a very depressing tone that comes with that this game captures very well. These people who have to deal with death but soldier on because that's life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's carried very well in the game's writing, but also in its music. This game has a wonderful soundtrack that combines both some acoustic instruments, but also there's a lot of synthesized music that is really just beautiful music. And that's good because a large part of this game has a music rhythm element, which I'll get to in a moment. For the most part, this game plays out like a graphic adventure, where progression is tied to solving puzzles. And these puzzles vary from your observing the environment to you're just kind of trying to figure out the rules of the puzzle itself. But every now and then you'll get into combat, and combat in this game involves a music rhythm kind of mini game. And that's kind of, I think, where the game has its biggest problems. The music rhythm minigame in here is not bad, but the problem is that it happens so infrequently and it's so demanding of the player that it acts like a major difficulty spike. Because this is the only time in the game where you have to have like a real-time element where you have to have good reflexes, and because the rest of the game is not at all demanding on this, the moment you hit one of these, in part because you haven't done it for a while, but also in part because the game wants to progress gradually in difficulty. Well, it's been a while since the last one, so we got to ramp up the difficulty quite a lot on this one. And it takes these moments that should have been refreshing and a change of pace and just makes them more frustrating than they need to be. Now, to the game's credit, it does have a difficulty setting, so you can choose not to have these be such a major frustration, but it's still disappointing that such a major part of this game kind of doesn't feel like it fits very well into the game. There are a few other minor gripes that I have with the game, like the walking speed is a bit slow. Overall, I'd still say it's very well worth playing. It has some good story, good music, and a very good kind of vibe to it, I guess I would say.
The art style is very unique
Yeah.
as well.
It has a kind of angular art style
Mhm.
using geometric shapes that's definitely visually striking. It definitely has its positive qualities, but it didn't quite make it into what I would consider my best games or even my hidden gems. Not quite. I considered putting it in my hidden gems, but really it felt like it made more sense in this category.
So the second game in the noteworthy reviews is MacBat64 Journey of a Nice Chap, which is also a patron voted game.
Yes, this was the patron budget voted game for the prior month. And much like I just talked about Super Kiwi 64 a moment ago, this is the game that came before that. And this one is also very much trying to evoke the feeling of the classic like Banjo-Kazooie, Nintendo 64 3D platformer kind of thing. This game, I think, is a better game, but that's also because it's kind of doing its own thing. It doesn't exactly feel like a Banjo-Kazooie style game. It's more like a tribute game that's kind of bringing you through a tour of different levels that are very brief, that still have a collectathon element to them, but it's so limited that you're going to be done with this game within the span of an hour. It's an entertaining hour. I didn't dislike the game. And given that it's so inexpensive, I believe it's $1 or $2, being one of the budget games, I don't think my money was wasted on this game. But at the same time, it's not a game that I feel like I'm going to be thinking of years from now. It's nice for how long it lasts and for what it's worth, but not really much more than that.
So for our best game, we want to thank Ben, who's one of our patrons. He chose the best game, which happened to be the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe.
Yes, this game was sponsored by Ben, so thank you very much, Ben, for recommending this. Not only do I appreciate your contribution, I also appreciate that you recommended what ended up becoming my favorite game that I played this month on Nintendo Switch. Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe came out last year, and this is the first time that this game has come to consoles, but it's been on PC for a while.
Yes, few years actually.
And it's been highly celebrated on PC for years because of the way that it kind of reimagines the medium and explores the medium in a fourth wall breaking meta kind of context. It's very well deserved praise. I mean, I've played the PC version of Stanley Parable. I'm not much of a PC gamer, but I have played that one. And I was kind of surprised, Jen, you being a PC gamer, you haven't played this game.
No, but I know somebody who did, and he spoke very highly of it. It just wasn't really my sort of game.
I can see that.
Yeah. I knew it was good from what everyone was telling me. I kind of knew what the premise of it was already, but it just didn't really pique my interest until you asked me to play it. At which point I realized, yeah, there's a reason why a lot of people like this game.
So, for those who are not familiar, the Stanley Parable is a walking simulator. And I know those words right off the bat are going to be a huge turnoff for some people.
Yeah.
I imagine that's a large part of the reason why you didn't really have an interest in it. I
never really classified it as a walking simulator in my head, actually. But, I mean, it kind of is a walking simulator.
I mean, pretty much all you're doing in the game is walking around.
Yep.
And for a lot of people, hearing the words walking simulator and all you're doing is walking around, there's a little bit more than that, but for the most part, you're just walking around. A lot of people see this as, well, it's not even really a video game then. You're not doing anything, you're just walking. But in this game, it actually uses that minimal amount of input to maximum effect, because based on the path you choose to walk, different things happen. And the game interacts with you based on this, in particular through the narrator.
And the narrator reminds me of Gladys from Portal, in the sense that they are just messing with you.
Kind of. It's interesting that you would say that because both Portal and the Stanley Parable were originally based on the Half-Life 2 engine.
Ah, okay.
They're originally built off of that. The Stanley Parable and Portal both have kind of evolved well beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's largely because people saw what amazing games these were and they took on a life of their own.
Right.
But where Portal was more about the puzzles and about, figuring out where to put your portals and then you use that to solve puzzles. There aren't really puzzles in the Stanley Parable. It's all about just which choice do you make and how does the narrator respond to that. And it kind of ends up getting into a lot of fourth wall breaking stuff where the narrator is like, and then he walked into the left door, and Jen is like, no, I didn't, and walks right into the right door. And the narrator's like, well, Stanley was apparently stupid because he didn't know how to follow directions. And the game kind of starts with that, but then it gets into increasingly more and more bizarre territory as it breaks down the game and rebuilds it from scratch into something different. That's the Stanley Parable right off the bat, but this version of the game does something a bit more than that. In addition to some mild graphical upgrades, I hesitate to even mention that because it's not really that noteworthy. The resolution is higher, the frame rate's higher.
I think it looks good on the Switch. I think it looks good.
It looks good. It doesn't look like it's not going to graphically wow anyone, but it looks good. But that's really the most minor of the changes to this version of the game. The biggest changes to this game are the new content that has been added into this version, which you access by literally walking into a door labeled new content.
I love that. I love that so much.
That entire section of the game, I will not go into too much detail, but I will say that it's an entire commentary on the idea of re-releases and sequels and the legacy that this game has had and how difficult it is to follow up on that legacy and what a foolish errand it is to even try to do that. And the funny thing is, in being a commentary about itself, it succeeds in doing what it's joking is impossible. And I think that on its own makes this a brilliant game for people to play, even if they've already played the game thoroughly in previous releases. This game has enough new content that makes it worthwhile to dive back in again. And it's just such a creative game, something that I think has been pretty influential over the years. I highly recommend, if you haven't played it, now is the perfect time to try. And the Nintendo Switch version is a fantastic version of the game. I don't think you'd go wrong playing that version. Any other version would be fine too, but the Switch version is great also.
So the Stanley Parable is one of a few games that you and I would probably consider postmodernist, futuristic, sort of plays with different concepts that don't really fit into what people regularly
Did you say futuristic?
Yeah, I think it's futuristic in a way.
I wouldn't call it futuristic. By postmodernist, I know I've tossed around this term a bunch, and maybe I'm misusing it. I don't think I am.
No.
Basically, it is a commentary on itself, or it is a work of art that is, in a sense, self-aware. It is a work of art that knows that it is a work of art and refers to itself in that manner.
Right.
And the most common form of postmodernism is fourth wall breaking.
Yep.
It's, when you're watching a movie and the character turns to the screen and says, well, isn't this an unusual predicament, talking to the audience. Mm-hmm. Deadpool is known for his fourth wall breaking. Yes. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about here, although that is not the only form of it. Because in the Stanley Parable, for example, like I said, as you're going through the game, it's talking about how, you're only supposed to do this in the game, or why do people always do this in the game? There's one ending in the Stanley Parable where if you look at the list of achievements, you notice that there's an achievement for clicking on one door 5 times. And so if you do that, the narrator will go, really? You're only here for the achievements? Well, that's not much of an achievement, is it? Clicking on a door 5 times? We need to do more than that. Why don't you go click on this door 20 times? No, that's not enough. Why don't you go click on this door 50 times? And that entire thing is postmodernist. that character, the narrator, is not talking to Stanley. He's talking to you, the player.
Yes.
So that's an example of postmodernism in video games.
And I wish there were more games like that.
There are some, and you see elements of that to some degree or another. Some of them are more subtle than others. Some of them are extremely blatant. Like Stanley Parable, it's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few other games that I've written some very unique reviews for.
I mean, Doki Doki Literature Club.
Doki Doki Literature Club is definitely one of them. And the thing is this game only works because it plays on the player's expectations of what type of game Doki Doki Literature Club is.
Mm-hmm.
And again, don't want to spoil it, but you go into this game thinking, well, this is a silly visual novel game about a guy in a harem kind of situation, and he's trying to date one of the girls, and it's kind of silly and upbeat. Without going into detail, suffice it to say that the game knows that you expect this, and that's kind of the point.
Yep. The other game that I really need to get around to playing is There Is No Game, Wrong Dimension.
Yeah, this is another game I reviewed
I love how
year.
wacky it is and how funny it, and the puzzles and all the things. It's wonderful, and I really need to play it at some point.
This is, in a way, it's similar to Stanley Parable in that it's a conversation between you and the narrator, your gameplay and the narrator's narration. And the entire point of the game is you start the game and the narrator is like, oh, I'm sorry, there's no game here. But through you moving a cursor and interacting with the game, you're turning it into a game, even though the narrator keeps insisting that it's not a game. And so it's kind of this fun, I don't even know how to describe it. We'll go with another like fancy term. It's like, it's got a certain je ne sais quoi.
I hate that phrase. Okay.
But there are other more subtle ways to do this. Like, one of the things that I thought was an amazing use of postmodernism in video games is in the very first BioShock. And I'm going to spoil the ending of BioShock for you now. So
yeah.
There's no way to talk about this without spoiling it. So if you have, for some reason, not played BioShock yet, stop this podcast now, go and play BioShock. I don't care which version you play, they're all good. It is amazing. It is a great, it's violent, so if you're not into M-rated games or you don't like first-person shooters, I understand. But otherwise, this is a must-play game. And early into the game starts with you going to this underwater city, and you hear a voice on the radio who's kind of helping you along, telling you where to go. And he's asking for help with different things that he needs as well, because he's stuck in the underwater city too. And he's like, would you kindly go here and help me out with this? And, hey, I'd really appreciate it if you go do that. Would you kindly go and do this? And late into the game, you go into the realm of the big villain who's in control of the entire city. And as you walk into his lair, you notice a lot of paperwork about mind control and about experiments on children and stuff like that. And you go to challenge this guy who's been heading up the city and who's been, the villain the entire game. And he puts a golf club in your character's hand, and he starts going off on this rant about a man chooses, a slave obeys. And he's using this key phrase, would you kindly, and telling you to do things. And you, having no control over the controller at this point, are doing what he tells you to. And then he says, would you kindly beat me to death with the golf club? And your character does that without any input from you. The implication being that this entire game, you felt like you've had control. You've had the illusion of control. But you've been following these instructions from this voice on the radio this entire time saying, would you kindly do this? Would you kindly do that? And because this is a linear game, you really didn't have any choice if you wanted to progress in the game. You had to do what the voice on the radio was telling you. Yep. And this is kind of a wake-up call to all this time you thought you've had choice, but really you've just been doing what we wanted you to do.
Oh, and BioShock Infinite completely flips that. I love that.
BioShock Infinite has its own stuff to, it's
yes.
It basically says you have tons of choices, but none of them matter.
Yep.
There are even little more subtle things, like it doesn't all have to be like an M-rated stuff, like Animal Crossing. The Animal Crossing series, for the longest time, had this character named Mr. Rossetti, where every time when you finish your game in Animal Crossing, you're supposed to save your game and then quit. But let's say you didn't want to save your game because you picked the wrong choice or something like that. In previous games, if this happened, the game would know that you didn't save, and Mr. Rossetti would pop up and lecture you on how wrong you were to not save your game properly, and how next time you'd better save your game. And every time you failed to save your game properly, he would pop up again and give you an even longer rant. And they've stopped doing this, I think, because small children were starting to get afraid of Mr. Rossetti, and they didn't want the game to be that kind of game. But this is the game talking to the player about the player's behavior, and not the character. Is,
even without him, the brief times that I've played Animal Crossing, if you've been gone for a while, the villagers will be like, "Where have you been? We haven't seen you in forever. We're glad to see you again. Please don't leave."
They still do that, and that's one of, and that's the other thing is when it is 12 o'clock in real life, it's 12 o'clock in the game. When it's January 13th in real life, it's January 13th in the game. When you are celebrating Christmas in real life, your little residents are celebrating it in the game. And in that respect, it's like the game is taking on this whole new life on its own. And again, I feel like that is also a postmodernist element. But it's kind of a kinder, more fuzzy, happy postmodernist element.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, would you kindly tell me what sort of games you've been hooked on, or just kind of pouring your time into without, saying, I'm doing this review for eShoppers?
Lately, I haven't been playing any games outside of eShopperReviews. Not really. Well, okay, that's not entirely fair. I have been playing some Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo with you, Jen.
I mean, okay, that's not fair, though. I meant on your own time without me, saying, I want to challenge you to a puzzle game.
The only games that I play these days outside of reviews are games that are little time wasters. Like, that I play the dumb Crush game. You just wanted me to say that again, didn't you?
No, I didn't, actually.
I play Super Mario Run on my phone because that's something I can easily do when I want to kill a minute or two at work or while I'm riding in the car or something. When it comes to gaming on my Nintendo Switch, well, actually, I don't even really game on my Nintendo Switch as much as I had previously because I'm really ramping up trying to review as many games as I can on the 3DS and Wii U before their eShops close this upcoming March.
Oh, and he's been putting a lot of time into that, let me tell you.
I want to try and review all of the worthwhile games that you still cannot get on Nintendo Switch or other modern platforms. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm making good progress. I don't know if I will hit that goal by the end of March, but I am certainly trying.
Okay, well, good to know that that's when you've been spending your time on and something for people to look forward to.
What, me finishing that?
Yes! I'm very curious, and I think a lot of people are too. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that wraps things up for this month's eShopperReviews podcast. Again, we want to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for contributing. Patreon donors are the first ones to gain access to these podcasts, and if you are interested in becoming a donor, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. And once again, if you're curious to read any of the reviews or content mentioned in this podcast, you can find it on the eShopperReviews subreddit at reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. This has been Jen Ip.
And Jake McNeil.
We'll see you next month, and in the meantime, we both hope you found this content helpful and enjoyed some good games. Catch you all next time.
Later.
Yay!